Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. Got a juicy one for you today. Breeders aren't on the same page these days, and it's hurting the grower. What do I mean by that? Well, I've spoken to a number of breeders over the years, and they all seem to do things a little bit differently. Now, one thing that has sparked a little bit of controversy recently was Zaza Genetics. Now, I'm not trying to single him out, but he does have a way of doing things that's a little bit different than other breeders. And I just want to talk about that today and spread some awareness to the growers because unfortunately it causes confusion in the community when some people are doing it some way, some people are doing it another way, then there's another way things are being done. And then there's arguments about which way is the right way to go about it. So figure I'd throw it all out here in this video, and I want to get your input as well. So at the end of this video, I want to hear your thoughts about what way do you think breeders should go about it. So I think one of the bigger disagreements amongst breeders is the testing of the genetics before the release. I had Zaza Genetics on my podcast. I actually have an episode coming up in a couple weeks here. I sat down with him. It was actually the second time I sat down with him and fired off a bunch of questions. And one of the things he mentioned in there, we talked about testing, and I was asking about what the proper way to test genetics before releasing to the public. And one of the things he had mentioned is that he does all in-house testing. He does all the testing himself. He wants to be sure that what he releases to anybody else besides him is solid. It's not going to harm on them. He wants to get to the point where he's comfortable and then release to the public because he doesn't want to have any bad experiences happening, such as the plant flipping, herming, showing nanners, for example, at some point throughout the flowering stage. Now, that statement alone caused another breeder, Chaz Westport, to speak up and talk about his perception of really the importance of having a team of testers. So Chad was saying not just test yourself, but also send out to a team of testers around the world. He had mentioned he sends testers out to a whole bunch of different people in different areas, some indoor growers, some outdoor growers. And he likes to send to new growers because they often make mistakes and they tend to stress out plants more than experienced growers. So Chad likes to get input from all of those people and then make the determination whether or not he's going to release genetics. At least that's what I grasped from what he was saying in another video. Shout out to Pigeons 420. He actually released a video on this. I'll link his video down in the description section below. He goes into both of their opinions in one video, and I thought that was a pretty juicy video as well. But that's just one example of how breeders just simply aren't on the same page when it comes to testing. Now, there are other things people aren't on the same page with, breeders aren't on the same page with, which is when it is acceptable and not acceptable for plants to herm. Now, there are two types of herms. There are herms where the plant is in flowering, and within the first roughly 2-3 weeks of flowering, there will be pollen sacs at the nodes. Now, from what I learned, this is genetic. It's not stress-induced. So this is going to be within the genetics. It happens. Apparently, there is a way to make it more of a recessive trait, so it shows less often. That just comes down to not selecting those and using those for future breeding projects. But there's also hermaphrodite plants that show intersex traits via nanners, and that is said to be stress-induced. And that'll typically show within the first several weeks of flowering, right? So the plant starts to flower. I've had nanners show as early as week 3, 4, 5. Very common. That is a big, a big blow to the grower because, well, you got to kill the plant at that point. Now, some people will take and pluck nanners off of the plant and try to get the plant to continue on for weeks and weeks and weeks until harvest so they actually get a harvest. Others are just going to kill off the plant at that point. So having nanners show within the beginning of flower in those first several weeks of flowering is detrimental. Now, what are the things that can actually cause the plant to be so stressed out that it causes nanners? Well, there are several different things. One of the things is heat. Too high of heat, and the plant could be so stressed out that it causes nanner. Too high of light stress, that causes nanner. I had a blueberry by MSNL years ago, and I had it too close to the light. I had this one branch that just came up, was flopping off towards the side, and it was only about 10 inches from my grow light. I thought I was going to be okay. All of a sudden, a couple of days later, and that whole branch was just loaded with nanners due to light stress. I took that upon me because I messed up. I felt like I had the light too close, a grower error. That's what I personally deemed it as. And I think a lot of growers will take responsibility if they are running plants, growing plants outside of the normal parameters. So too high of heat. how much is too high of heat? It's a little bit subjective, right? Are we talking over 90 degrees Fahrenheit? Are we talking over 100 degrees Fahrenheit? At what point should we test to ensure that nanners aren't going to show before actually selecting that plant to be used on a breeding project? I think that's up for debate. I think there's a lot of disagreements with breeders amongst that. And just in general, showing nanners when there is too high of heat, there's some disagreements on if that's a grower error or a breeder error. Zaza Genetics, for example, he had mentioned that's a breeder error. You should be breeding that characteristic out. The plant should be able to take so much light and not produce nanners. Other breeders are going to say, oh no, they ran it too high of heat. It caused nanners. That's a grower's fault. And so unfortunately, this information is being passed down to the growers and there's confusion going on. I actually had a grower hit me up recently and he had mentioned the Chill OG is showing nanners. And when I heard that, my heart dropped. I was like, what the heck? I stress these plants, heat stress, light stress, and select it down to the F3. Why is it showing nanners? It doesn't make sense. Nobody else was reporting this. Well, come to find out the grower actually went beyond the harvest window and nanners were shown. And that's what I think that I thought a lot of people knew about, but if plants are grown past the harvest time, there is a high chance of nanners showing just because the plant, it wants to reproduce, right? It wants to continue on. It wants to self-pollinate, create seeds, and obviously have those seeds drop to the ground and then more plants grow. That's a part of nature. So yeah, if you're running plants past the harvest window, it can certainly show nanners. And do we blame that on the breeder or do we blame that on the grower? I think that's another thing a lot of people argue about, because we hear about nanners should never show by any circumstances. Nanners should never show. Unfortunately, they're hearing that. They're pushing plants past the harvest window, seeing nanners, and then they're going back to the breeder and saying, hey, your plant's showing nanners. But yeah, if you're within that harvest window and you're seeing nanners, then a plant should be harvested at that point. I've had so many genetics over the years where it was ready for harvest. And I was like, I'll give it another day. I wanted to bulk up a little bit more. And then all of a sudden, like a day or two later, it has nanners on it. Now, am I going to go back to the breeder and say, hey, your plant showed nanners and expect them to take responsibility? I'm personally not. I personally am going to just say, hey, I should have harvested a day before. But there are growers out there who are going to go to the breeder and say, hey, your plant's showing nanners. You have bad genetics, blah, blah, blah. So again, this kind of stems back to breeders not being on the same page with things. And unfortunately, it's trickling down to the grower and there's confusion. And it's not really just the breeding topic that there's confusion, right? There's confusion within lighting. There's confusion within soil biology. There's lots of disagreements that happen. But it seems recently there's just been a lot of people who have just been confused on the breeding side of things when it comes to when you should test, how long you should test, when nanners should show, if it's the breeder's fault, if it's the grower's fault. There's a lot of questions at this point, and it seems like there's not really a clear-cut answer on these things. So I want to make this video to spread some awareness, to let you guys know that there are people who are just not on the same page about different things. So your beliefs may be different from theirs. The fact of the matter is, science hasn't evolved enough to really show everything we need to know about this plant. We are continuing to learn new things almost every single day. And that's one thing that makes it fun for me is it's an endless amount of things that we can learn. Again, this isn't bashing any breeder at all. I know I named Zaza and I named Chad Westport. Both those guys I respect highly. I gain information from both of them. Zaza's been on my podcast a couple times. Chad's been on my podcast a couple times. I welcome them on my podcast again in the future because they really have a lot of great insight. But not all breeders are on the same page, and unfortunately, it's causing confusion for the grower. So I'd love to hear your opinion on what you think about these things. Testing. How do you think testing should be done? Should it just be internal by one person? Should it be spread out to multiple people? Hermaphrodite plants. Is it the grower's error or the breeder's error if the plant is run too high in nanners show? Temperature is what I'm referring to. Or too high of light. If the plant is exposed to too high of light in nanners show, is that the grower error or the breeder error? I'd love to know your opinion down in the comment section below. I'm going to link Pigeon's 420 video down in the description section below. Click on that, tune into that. That's a good watch. It shows both Zaza's perception and Chad Westport's perception. And leave a comment on his video and let him know that I sent you. Thank you so much for watching. And until next time, peace.